can see that we have present Councillor Buchanan, Councillor Dewar. I have apologies from Councillor Donnelly, but I can see that Councillor Toner has joined as a substitute. I have apologies from Councillor Fulton, but I can see that Councillor Mars has joined as a substitute. Councillor Handybode, I'm not seeing you present. Also present today is Councillor Kerr. I have apologies from Councillor Lockhart. Also present today is Councillor McDougall. Also in attendance we have the Council Leader, Councillor Fagan, and the Chief Executive, Paul Manning. We have a number of officers in attendance as well as colleagues from Audit Scotland, and with that I'll pass back to yourself, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, so we'll start with our usual declaration of interest on item 1. Does anyone have any declaration of interests? Not seeing any. Okay, moving on to item 2, the minutes of the previous meeting. So we'll need 2 people who were at the previous meeting to move and second those, please. Do I have a mover?
I'll move the previous minutes.
Thanks, Colin. And a seconder?
I'll second that, Chair.
Thanks, Helen. Okay, moving on to item 3. These are our items for decision. And I'll ask Yvonne Douglas to speak to item 3, Internal Audit Annual Assurance Report for 24-25. Thank you, Yvonne.
Thanks, Chair. So this is the Internal Audit Annual Assurance Report for 24-25. The report is split into 2 main parts. The first part talks about the internal audit service that was delivered in the year, and the second part talks about the output from the service that was delivered in the year, and that then allows a formal audit opinion to be expressed within section 8 of the report. So having said it's split into 2 main parts, there are 5 separate sections. So I'll just take you through each of those sections because that then leads to the conclusion at the end of the report. So the first 2 sections, section 3 and section 4, talks about the internal audit service that was delivered. In section 3, in the background, we're giving you some context around the service, and there's a number of kind of important points in there. So within that section, I'm confirming that as a service, we complied with the relevant internal audit standards, that the role of the Chief Internal Auditor complied with CITFA guidance. We're also setting out how the service sits within the Council's wider governance framework, what our reporting lines are, and how audit work links to the Council's objectives and risks. Section 4 then goes on to give you a wee bit more detail. It does that through a kind of series of words, but it also has some graphs in there as well, just to try and help you quickly understand the kind of main points around delivery of the service during the year. And what I'm doing in this section is I'm reporting back on the entire audit plan for 24-25, and that's the plan that was approved by this committee in March 2024. So, as I said, the detail sits within the paragraphs, but there's also a series of graphs. Key points to bring to your attention around service delivery. The plan covered 1/3 of the Council's identified top risks. Of that plan, there were 54 separate audit assignments within the plan, and the report is setting out that we completed 52 of the 54 assignments by the end of April. We delivered our planned number of audit days when I make a small adjustment for an election office secondment that we hadn't anticipated at the start of the year when we set out our plan. And we've also broadly aligned to how we intended to spend our time, so the split between external clients, our routine work and our investigative work. You'll see that our productivity was marginally below target. We set ourselves a target of 80% and it was 79%. But in table 5, I've tried to give you a bit more information around how the non-productive time was spent. So you can still see it relates to items that are of use. It's just that we don't define that as being productive time. We delivered the majority of the assignments within budget or just marginally over budget. And by that, I mean within a day of what we anticipated to spend on the assignment. And we also delivered our draft reports within the target of 80%, and that's set out in the final table, table 9. So that kind of forms the first part of the report. The second part of the report then goes on to talk about the output from the plan, and that starts in section 5. And this is the output from the programme of audit work that we completed in the year. You'll see it's set out across 3 headings. Firstly, governance, then goes on to talk about risk management, and then internal control. And it does that because that's the same way in which the audit opinion is expressed. So what I'm doing is trying to walk you through so that when you get to the same part of me as the audit opinion, you understand why that audit opinion says what it does say. So just taking each of those outputs in turn, if I start with governance, which is in paragraphs 5.2 to 5.8, and that's on pages 11 and 12. Within that area, I'm confirming that there are robust processes around preparation of the Council's draft governance statement. I'm confirming that internal and external audit actions were implemented on time in the year, and I'm also advising that we looked at anti-fraud arrangements and these were refreshed in 24-25. The report then goes on to talk about risk management, and that's paragraphs 5.9 to 5.29, again across pages 13 to 15. That's confirming that further work was completed to document and analyse controls that manage the Council's top risks, and it's also setting out a position statement in relation to 3 of those risks, specifically cyber, business continuity and sustainability. The final section, internal controls, set out in paragraphs 5.30 to 5.49, and that's across pages 15, 16, 17 and 18. And the work in that area was we provided assistance pre and post go live with Fusion. We developed a programme of data matching. There's a core programme of routine audits, and there's some output in relation to those routine audits within the report. We provided advice and guidance to council services. We delivered investigative assignments, and we also facilitated delivery of the NFI exercise. So all of that, both the delivery of the service, the output from the service, takes you then to the audit opinion, which is within section 6 of the report. As I said, the structure of that opinion is defined by the standards. The opinion itself is at 6.4 and it's in bold. For the committee's attention, that's a positive opinion. It's unchanged from previous years, and it's also the same opinion that you'll see within the governance statement, which is the next item on the committee's agenda today. At the end of the report, I'm kind of pointing you towards 25-26, some of the challenges, some of the issues that we face, and some of the things that you'll see reflected in the reports that will come to the committee throughout the year. So I'm talking about the use of internal audit resources around implementation of new systems, about the provision of advice and guidance and that growing role that we have, which is helpful with the new standards because they talk about the value added element of internal audit, so that very much aligns to that. I'm talking about, within that section, the requirement for us to develop our skills, how we use new technology, and we're also referencing the new internal audit standards and some of the work that we need to do around that. So kind of 3 key areas there, which are around having revised performance indicators, developing a more formal audit strategy, and having a more extensive assurance mapping process in place. And as I say, these are all reports that the committee will see coming through in 25-26. So just kind of giving you some forward notice around some of those items and a bit more background in relation to them. I think that's the main points within the report. If I just take you back to the recommendations on page 7, they're at 2.1. There are 3 separate recommendations. I'm asking that you know our performance, that you know our overall findings and how that has informed the audit opinion and then the Council's 24-25 governance statement, and that you're noting the level of assurance that was set out in 6.4 of the report. Happy to take any questions that anybody may have at this stage or at a later point. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Yvonne. Do we have any questions? I'm not seeing any questions coming up, so I'll maybe just make a comment. So just to thank you and your team for another year of audit work, and as demonstrated in the report, there's a vast gamut of items that you look at, from the value add stuff you mentioned, which I think was part of a previous audit output, to supporting rollout of Oracle Fusion, responding to reports of council tax fraud in Aberdeen, reviewing home education and a whole load of other things. That's too many to mention. I also just wanted to pick up on the 5.12, it's cyber security. As I was driving in today, I heard there's been a massive cyber attack in Glasgow City Council. So obviously it's a real live issue for councils and for everyone, Marks and Spencers and everyone else. It's a real issue that has to be taken really seriously. I don't think they affected anyone's financial records in Glasgow, but they've had to take down a load of their online services, which I'm sure you'll either hear about on the news or have already heard about. If there's no other questions, then I'll ask the committee to approve the report and the 3 recommendations of the performance, the findings and the audit opinion. And I'll move that. Can I have a seconder?
I'll second it.
Thanks, Colin. Okay, moving on to item 4, another item for decision. We've got the annual governance statement for 23-24 and significant governance areas, quarter 4 progress report. And I'll ask Craig Ferguson, our Head of Finance Transactions, to speak to the report, please. Craig.
Thank you, Chair. The report provides committee with the proposed annual governance statement for 2024-25 for inclusion in the Council's accounts for the year, and also an update on progress on significant governance areas for Q4 for last year. Section 3 sets out the background to the report. And each year the Council undertakes a comprehensive review of the governance arrangements that are required to support the Council's financial and operational controls. And this annual review of governance arrangements informs the governance statement, which is then included in the Council's annual accounts. And at 3.2, just draw your attention to the Council's governance assurance framework is detailed Appendix 1 to the report. Moving on to Section 4, which is the annual governance statement for 2024-25. That's provided in full for committee's attention, Appendix 2. 4.3 will highlight the internal assurance opinions that are set within Section 6 of the governance statement. It references the opinion of the Council's Audit and Compliance Manager and also the opinion of the Council's Risk Management Service. Section 7 of the statement highlights significant governance areas which were identified through the Horizon scanning process and the Director's Statement of Assurance, and the key action has been taken to address these during 2025-26. The committee is asked to consider these areas detailed in the summary below, and comments have been added where appropriate to show whether it's a new action or has been carried forward from the previous statement. In the first area there listed in the table is new, and that relates to information governance. It's drawn that to the committee's attention. 4.5 is asked to note the content of the annual governance statement is subject to scrutiny by the external auditor and therefore may change after approval by the Risk and Audit Scrutiny Committee. However, the final governance statement will be resubmitted for approval for the final accounts. Section 5 covers governance areas. Progress on those governance areas within the annual statement for 23-24 is attached as Appendix 3. The preparation of the statement itself follows completion of the Executive's Director's Statements of Assurance supported by resource checklists. I would add the Governance Group did evaluate the governance review process during 24-25 and will continue to seek improvements in preparation for the 25-26 annual review of governance arrangements. Our committee back to the recommendations. The annual governance statement attached to Appendix 2, due to be included in the Council's 24-25 annual report and statement of accounts, be approved, and that progress against significant governance areas identified within the annual governance statement for 23-24 attached to Appendix 3 be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Craig. Does anyone have any questions for Craig on that report? Not seeing any questions, I'll maybe ask a question. Okay, and again, thank you for your report as well. I know a lot of work goes into these, so thanks to you and your team. I did have the question about page 26, the item that you brought to our attention, the new item on the governance areas. Information governance noted as continuing to perform below target in a number of areas despite some improvements in 24-25. I just wanted you to maybe explain a bit more about what that is and what actions might be taken to address it.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Chair. So this covers performance across resources against a range of governance matters, including responding to freedom of information requests and also subject access requests within the required timescales. It's not causing any concerns in relation to providing the assurance level required for the Council's governance statement. There's a number of improvement actions identified by resources, including need for further staff training and further raising of awareness of standards and also good practice. These improvements delivered during 2025-26 with oversight provided by the Good Governance Group.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much, Craig. Any other questions for Craig? Seeing anything? Okay, so can I move the report and the recommendations that are in the report, and I'll look for a seconder, please.
I'll second it.
Thanks, Colin. Okay, so that's the items for decision covered. So we're now moving on to our items for noting, and that will be our unaudited accounts. See, we've got one of our auditors with us today, as well as Lorraine is here to speak to the accounts, and I'll pass over to Lorraine.
Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon, members. So following on from the two previous linked reports, then this paper is, as you suggested, the annual accounts for the Council and the charitable trusts for members' consideration and noting this afternoon. Section 3 gives a bit of the background. It explains the requirements in terms of our external audit actions, and it also explains that these accounts should be considered by the Risk and Audit Scrutiny Committee, and we see that as good practice. Section 4 details the statutory requirement then to compile the accounts, and that they're completed in line with the accounting standards, and include the usual statements such as income expenditure statement, a balance sheet, a statement on our reserves, a cash flow, and a number of supplementary notes for information. And they also include the annual governance statement that you've just approved as a committee there. The accounts themselves are included in Appendix 1 for your consideration, and Section 4.3 to 4.5 notes the next steps in terms of the annual accounts and the audit process as we move through the next few months. So they will be available for public inspection from the 1st to the 22nd of July. They'll be issued to external audit by the end of this month and to members thereafter. The audit itself will then take place over the next 3 months, and then finally we'd look to be bringing the audited accounts back to yourselves at this committee in late September. Sections 4.6 to 4.9 note that we've provided a reconciliation in one of the appendices to the report, and that's between the approved position from this morning's Executive Committee through to where we are showing the accounting presentation in the actual annual accounts. The accounts themselves include the implementation of a number of accounting practices where there's items that are non-controllable in terms of how we spend our money in the council, but it's how we have to present it in line with accounting guidance. So that's the reason for that reconciliation, and that's in Appendix 2 to your pack. Section 5 notes the same arrangements in place for the charity accounts, and they're included in Appendix 3 for your information. And if I can take members back to the recommendation in Section 2 then, and ask that the committee approve the unaudited annual accounts for the council and the related charitable trusts be presented to the members of this committee for your consideration, and also that they'll be submitted to Audit Scotland by the deadline of the 30th of June. Be noted. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorraine. Do we have any questions for Lorraine on the unaudited accounts? No questions today, Lorraine? Thank you. Okay, so I would propose to note the accounts, and I'll be looking for a seconder, please.
I'll second it.
Thanks, Colin. And I think that Paul and Joe can now leave if you wish. I know it's been a long day. Thank you for your attendance. So moving on to item 6, internal audit activity as at the 30th of May 2025, and back to Yvonne, our Audit and Compliance Manager, to speak to this one, please. Thank you, Yvonne.
Thank you, Chair. So this is really just for completeness and to close down the 24-25 audit plan. So there'll be a bit of duplication in terms of what's in this report with what was in the annual report. So you'll see kind of similar figures being quoted within this report. It talks about the 52 assignments that are completed to draft report stage. Appendix 1, it lists all those assignments that were issued as final in the period 12th April through to 30th of May. And our performance indicators for completeness are also attached to Appendix 2, but again that reflects the same information that was in the annual report, just no fancy graphs this time. One of the assignments that was closed in the period relates to sustainability. It's one of the top risks faced in the council, and attached to Appendix 3 is a position statement, which is really us just gathering together all of the information that's been reported to committee throughout the year. We're looking at some of the commitments that were made in 24-25 and the progress against that. What the position statement is trying to do is change set out the fact that the changing nature of the risk and the factors that are impacting the council's ability to mitigate and meet net zero targets by 2045. It talks about the route map that's been set out about energy efficiency strategies and delivery plans that have been put in place. But it's also referencing the fact that the Council won't be able to achieve this without working with others to deliver actions. And it's noting that progress is made here through a series of incremental steps. So it is those steps each year that we're trying to track in terms of overall progress. What we're also saying within the position statement is we know that every time action's taken, there's wider considerations there around the impact on residents and communities. And a lot of the council reports are reflecting on the challenges around fuel and food poverty and inequality and how that impacts on our ability to respond to actions around sustainability. In the position statement, we're noting that there's further actions planned in 25-26, and within the audit plan that was approved by the committee back in March, we've committed to continue to look at progress and to bring a position statement back to you at the end of 25-26. The recommendations in this report are simply that you note progress. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Yvonne. Do we have any questions for Yvonne on that report? No questions today for that one, Yvonne? I think we covered a lot in the previous one, so thank you very much. So I can ask that we'll move the report, and I'll ask for a seconder, please.
I'll second it.
Thanks, Colin. On to number 7, the National Fraud Initiative exercise. Now, we usually get questions on this. Okay, so over to Yvonne again to speak to the 2024 National Fraud Initiative exercise. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. So we're at the start of a new NFI exercise. The process started back in September of last year, where we uploaded a number of different data sets to NFI. And alongside us, there were a whole range of public sector bodies that did the same. And we all provide the same data, and that is then matched. What happens is that then comes back to us in the form of a series of reports. And Appendix 1 gives you a summary of all the areas that were matched for South Lanarkshire Council. And then in Appendix 2, we provide a summary of all the matches that have been returned to us for investigation. You'll see there are 32,675. We've also provided a comparison to the previous exercise, and the report gives you some explanations around the various increases and decreases. As you can appreciate, we can't look at 32,675 matches, and we don't need to, because a lot of them are false or erroneous. So what we do is we attach a series of risk indicators to those data matches. They're set out in paragraph 4.9 of the report. And when we go through that process, we then reduce the number of matches for investigation, and that's what Appendix 3 is setting out for you. The reduced target is 2,887. Now, I appreciate that appears relatively low, but it's a similar approach that we've taken in previous exercises. There's a strong rationale as to how we get to that number, and we do work with Audit Scotland to make sure that they're comfortable with our approach. Overarching all of that, I would say that we continue to get new matches, and we also look at the outcome of our investigations. So if there are outcome from investigations, we will increase the target number that we look at. So 2887 is our minimum target, but there might be increases to that as we work our way through that process. In terms of updates in relation to progress with investigating these matches, they'll come to you in the routine fraud reports that come to the committee throughout the year. I'll give you a brief update in terms of the progress that we're making. We need to complete all of our investigations by March of next year, but we've set ourselves an earlier target of December to give us 3 months just to mop up anything that we need to for the final part of the exercise. We will come back to you with a formal report on all of our outcomes. That's likely to be around September of next year, and that's similar to what we've done for previous exercises. The Cabinet Office have come up with a strategy for the first time. I've attached that at Appendix 4. They set it out across 5 separate objectives, and essentially what they're trying to do is come up with a way to better detect and prevent fraud, and they do that across those 5 headings, and that's what they intend to work towards for the period through to 2028. So an evolving process and one that we continue to participate in and commit resources to, but we do it in a way that's proportionate to the outcomes that we get from the exercise. and in a way that satisfies our external auditors. So at this stage, I'm asking that you note the results of the matching exercise, what our initial target number of investigations are, and also that you note the overarching NFI strategy at Appendix 4, which is set out across the 5 objective headings. And again, happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Yvonne. Any questions for Yvonne on the fraud exercise? No questions. I suppose it's just an observation, as from me as usual, that there's a vast number of matches that are thrown up, but a lot of them will be false matches, and you're applying a risk-based strategy agreed with Audit Scotland to reduce that to a manageable amount, and it does seem to come up with some actual valid fraud items.
Yeah, there are outcomes from the exercise. The majority of our outcomes are, again, single person discount, but we already have an external contractor that has a rolling programme of reviews in that area. So we're kind of mindful that we don't want to replicate that work. So that's part of the exercise that we go through, is to make sure that these matches are not already investigated through another source, and that we only look at the residual matches. There will be some outcomes in there, but they generally are not significant. But we'll keep that under review as we go throughout the year, and I'll provide updates to the committee if that position changes in any way.
Okay, thanks very much, Yvonne. And so if there's no other questions, I'll just ask for the report to be, I'll move the report and I'll ask for a seconder, please.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Colin. And we've been swiftly moved through that set of important reports today, so thanks to everyone who's spent a vast amount of time in their teams and pulling all that important information together. So the last item on the agenda is our forward programme for future meetings. So I'll pass over to Elizabeth Ann to speak to that, please. Elizabeth Ann.
Thank you, Chair. Just to remind the committee, this is a standard agenda item at the Risk and Audit Scrutiny Committee, and the background is set out at paragraph 3.1 of the report for your information. The purpose of the report is to advise members of the forward programme for this committee, and in the case of this report, meetings are detailed up to the 25th of August 2026, and the programme is detailed in the appendix. Members are also invited to suggest topics for inclusion in the committee's forward programme. The recommendation is set out at paragraph 2.1, whereby the committee is being asked to note the forward programme up to the 25th of August 2026. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth Ann. And just to encourage people to come forward if you've got any thoughts on items you'd like to have aired at this meeting. I think we've had some previous items that have been brought from requests from members. For example, we had an update on Oracle Fusion. You know, there could be other things as well. So if people have thoughts on that, get in touch with myself or the clerk to the committee, who I believe is going to be moving from to Ashara. Is that right? Ashara. And Elizabeth Ann has been promoted. So who knew? I didn't. So congratulations to Elizabeth Ann. Thank you very much. There's no urgent business, and thank you everyone for all your work and your attendance today. Thanks very much.